extensive domestic uranium reserves, CANDU power stations can provide Canada with a secure source of electrical energy. In a study conducted in 1974, it was estimated that there would be 40,000 megawatts of nuclear electric generating capacity installed by 1990. However, because of the reduction in the growth and demand and capital restraints from all forms of electrical energy, this estimate has been scaled down and reduced to 25,000 megawatts. Although the capital requirements for CANDU stations are high, current estimates suggest that the real costs may not increase. In fact, Ontario Hydro estimates that the second Pickering station under construction will cost slightly less than the first in constant dollars. What about the safety of the CANDU nuclear power? Let me just touch on a number of the concerns often expressed. Heat pollution. It is true that there are possible undesirable effects from warm water discharged from a generating station. This, however, is not peculiar to just nuclear generating stations. It is an inherent feature of all thermal generating stations. With appropriate design of water discharge systems, a very little effect can be seen beyond the immediate area of the plant discharge. And even there, the effect is limited to a thin surface layer, for example. At the Pickering station, it is difficult to detect any increase in lake water temperature, even at the surface 2 miles from the plant. The discharge systems of new plants are being designed to achieve an even better dispersion. What about radioactive releases? The releases of radioactive material from a nuclear plant like the 2,000 megawatt Pickering generating station near Toronto are extremely small, and on average less than 1% of the limits allowed by the recommendations of the International Commission on Radiological Protection. To put this in context, people living the nearest to a large nuclear plant, such as the Pickering station, receive less than 1 millirem per year of radiation from the plant. Compare that to over 100 millirem per year from natural sources, or 70 to 80 millirem per year from medical and dental treatments. By far, the largest source of radioactive waste is in the spent uranium fuel. The spent fuel in Canada is currently being stored in bays of water at the nuclear stations. 12 feet of water provides the required shielding. Later, this spent fuel will be moved to large concrete canisters designed for medium-term storage for several decades. A program is underway to develop the use of deep excavations in stable rock, such as granite found in the Canadian Shield, for ultimate disposal. These are masses of rock which geologists have determined have not been disturbed for millions of years. A pilot facility for terminal disposal is scheduled to be completed by 1985 in Canada. Plutonium can be used as a fuel, but must first be extracted by reprocessing the spent fuel. This is not necessary for the Canadian CANDU system, but it is being studied to determine if it might be worthwhile to do so. If so, then the radioactive waste from the reprocessing plant would be put in glass material and placed in deep geological excavations. What about accidents? A nuclear explosion is not possible in a nuclear power reactor. The configuration and the nature of the fuel and of the reactor just won't permit it. Concern has been expressed about Canada's sale of nuclear reactors and uranium to other countries. Many countries are facing energy problems similar to ours and are turning to nuclear power as a solution. The Government of Canada, as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, feels it has an obligation to share the peaceful application of nuclear power. The Prime Minister put it very clearly when he spoke in Ottawa last summer, and I quote, "It would be unconscionable under any circumstances to deny to the developing countries the most modern of technologies as assistance in their quest for higher standards of living. But in a world increasingly concerned about depleting reserves of fossil fuels, about food shortages, and about the need to reduce illness, it would be irresponsible as well to withhold the advantages of the nuclear age, of power reactors, agricultural isotopes, and cobalt beam therapy units." Consistent with this, Canada has adopted the toughest safeguard standards in the world to ensure that its nuclear technology is used for peaceful purposes. Canada has been a leader in encouraging the development and application of international safeguards. The challenge of our age is not to opt out of the problems associated with the development of nuclear energy, both in Canada and in the world, but rather to ensure that it is used for peaceful purposes and to solve the human problems created by a world starved for energy. There's no single solution to the world's energy problems. Nuclear power will not solve all our problems. Neither will renewable resources. We must find a balanced combination of energy sources to meet our future needs. We must reduce our insatiable demand for more energy, and we must cooperate. With the support of all levels of government, industry, and the Canadian people, we will be able to continue to have a reasonable lifestyle, and more than that, we will be able to contribute to on a world scale. That's an ambition worthy of our country. Thank you.
I'm now going to thank you, Dr. Foster. I'm now going to ask Michael McCloskey to address us. Michael McCloskey is the executive director of the Sierra Club, which you all know of as a very important organization in the ecological field in the United States. McCloskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last night I flew in from California, which yesterday became the first major political entity in the Western Hemisphere to hold up development of nuclear power. Because of the impact that such events in California may have on U.S. policy, I thought that I would devote my time here today to describing the California scene. On June 8th, next Tuesday, voters in the state of California will participate in the first broad-scale effort to make nuclear power socially responsible. They're voting on a measure to set new ground rules to determine whether nuclear power can be safely developed. The measure, which was placed on the ballot by the initiative of hundreds of thousands of citizens of that state who signed petitions, is opposed quite naturally by electric utilities and a coalition of industry and labor unions. The measure is being advanced by a coalition of socially and environmentally concerned groups, including the Sierra Club. The measure would require that the state's legislature make findings within 5 years with respect to whether nuclear power systems in fact are adequate and whether radioactive waste can be stored or disposed of without harming the environment. An expert group would be impaneled to advise the legislature. If 2/3 of each chamber of the legislature is satisfied on the questions of safety and waste disposal, then the restrictions on nuclear development would be lifted. If they're not, however, then no nuclear plants could be located in the state, and existing plants would have to be derated to 60% of the level of output for which they were designed, and would further be derated by an additional 10% each year thereafter until the legislature were satisfied. And such a derating to 60% would also occur unless all legal limits on financial liability in the U.S. to potential victims of a nuclear accident were removed within 1 year. Moreover, the restrictions which would come into force in 5 years in the absence of affirmative findings would also come into effect within 3 years, unless the legislature then determines it's reasonable to expect that the affirmative findings will be made at the end of the 5-year study period. The measure also requires annual publication and review of evacuation plans for each nuclear plant. Now, this ballot struggle marks a new turn in the debate over nuclear power in the United States. The critics of nuclear power have turned their attention to the political opportunities afforded by some 20 states, mainly in the West, which provide an initiative process for enacting new laws. After more than 5 years of making headway slowly in persuading the federal government to reform its handling of the nuclear issue, the critics are going directly to the electorate in these states. Similar initiatives will be on the ballot this fall in the states of Oregon and Colorado. And initiative drives are underway in scores of other states too. Now, no one knows what the outcome will be of these efforts. Polls in California have suggested that the vote next Tuesday may be close, with slightly more voters leaning against the proposition than for it, but interestingly enough, with far fewer of those against it really committed to their position. The number of voters who have an opinion has grown quickly, with the issue drawing intense coverage in the mass media. Clearly, the initiative is providing an ideal tool for educating the public. The mystique of nuclear power is being shattered. People are beginning to grasp that it is merely a complicated way to boil water to produce steam. The issue will never again be the sole preserve of the so-called experts. While the issue at first seemed too complex for the average voter, the point is being made successfully that basic social questions are at stake. With the scientific community split down the middle, the public must choose. What risk is tolerable, and for whom, and how long? And most important, who should be the judge? As never before, high technology is being brought to the bar of public responsibility and accountability. The California legislature, which was being outflanked by the electoral process because of its apathy, has now been galvanized into dealing with the issue. A long inquiry last winter by the lower chamber produced both a comprehensive report and a series of bills which have raced to get through the legislature before Election Day. They cleared the legislature the day before yesterday and were signed, as I said at the outset, by the governor yesterday. These measures are much more limited in scope than the initiative, but were still opposed by the utilities, by the same coalition that's opposing the ballot measure. The measures which are now law in the state of California would require the state's Energy Commission to determine whether federal plans for reprocessing and storing nuclear wastes are adequate. The determination has to be made after 1 year without a veto by either chamber of the legislature. No more nuclear plants can be built in California until such a finding is made and sustained. Also, a study is to be made of the advantages of building nuclear plants underground to minimize safety hazards. A number of surprising things have surfaced in this campaign over the nuclear initiative, which is called Proposition 15. First of all, the campaign has been long. It began last winter. It has been a front-page story ever since. Normally, not much attention is paid to initiative campaigns until 6 weeks before the election. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent on an advertising war in the campaign, with, as you might expect, the opponents outspending the proponents by a 5-to-1 ratio. However, the press on the whole has given rather sophisticated treatment to the issue. Its coverage has not degenerated into either a confused exchange of simple-minded characterizations, nor into an arcane debate among the experts. Most importantly, the debate has really turned public attention to the question of what kind of energy future do we want to plan to have? What does the public really want for its future energy supply? Out of the welter of studies that have been commissioned and released in the last few months, the principal conclusion to emerge is that there are lots of choices to make, and these choices are basically social in nature. The most basic choice is, how fast should the energy supply grow? While the utilities in California have dropped their forecasts for load growth in electricity, not energy as a whole, but just electricity, from 7% to 4 or 5%, environmentalists are arguing that electrical growth in the range of 1.5% to 3% is preferable. It would both save money and better protect the environment. If the growth rate is, for instance, 3% rather than 4%, for instance, half of the new nuclear plants that would be planned then would not be needed. One study found that present capacity in that state, plus already planned hydroelectric and geothermal facilities, might handle a really low growth in demand for as many as 20 years. In contrast, a 5.5% rate of growth, which is what the utilities want, would require $25 to $50 billion in capital to build the projected nuclear plants, leading to pressures for rate increases every year after 1980 through the year 2000. It really means that nuclear power will cost the public the most. The advocates of the Nuclear Safeguards Initiative have pointed out that new supplies are available from a number of sources. Some are uniquely plentiful in California, but not all are. Geothermal power is already established there and might be pushed to provide as much as 20% of the power needed by the end of the century. Opportunities for solar power are excellent, as well as using prevailing winds off the ocean. Together, we figure that they might supply 16% of the power by then. And 8% of the power might be derived from converting organic waste into power from municipal sewage and garbage, as well as from farms and feedlots. Moreover, with delivery of Alaskan oil due soon, whether we like it or not, there'll probably be a surplus of it on the West Coast, and there's inadequate pipeline capacity to ship it east. If we wanted to, 1/3 of it could be used to completely replace nuclear power, though using solar power and geothermal